But for real expert skiing, meet Dick Durrance, former national champion and member of Olympic teams. He's won many American ski trophies and incidentally lives in Aspen. He has a homegrown style of skiing all his own, and in deep snow does his dipsy doodle. Watch him go. Takes legs to do that.
He would just sink in the snow and then let it lift him up. He just bounced from side to side. And how they got the name Dipsy Doodle, I don't know.
Oh, the Dipsy Doodle looks like a duck walking on water.
Do I Dipsy Doodle? Yeah.
He skied on one ski most of the time. He'd step on the ski and then lift the other one.
I'm probably one of the few people of my era that actually even know what the Dipsy Doodle is or know how to do it. But yes, I do.
Dick Durrance went and made a presentation to the FIS that he could provide a course that would literally, I think in his words, knock their socks off.
In 1950, Aspen was chosen as the site for the FIS World Ski Championships, the greatest international ski competition that had ever been held in America.
We were now an internationally famous ski area, and from then on, the world has come to Aspen to ski.
Dick was a photographer and skier first before he became a filmmaker. And I am very impressed looking back at the photography he did in the early days and how that carried into his cinematography and his films. The things that were nice about his films is that they were complete productions. He would have good narration, great soundtracks, and the editing would be such that you wouldn't need somebody doing the lecture-style soundtrack on it. It was just more sophisticated and much more fun to watch.
Dick was like one of the first skiers to go travel the world and show that American skiers were, you know, a force to be reckoned with.
Well, he was number one in American skiing, there's no question, from 1936 to 1941 or so.
You know, he was like the leader of our first true international racing squad.
The National Ski Association medals for national championships. The engraving is off of a photograph of him where he's going at a terrific rate of speed and really angled over in the turn. And that's why he was the man on the medal.
My mother, she went to the University of Florida in Tallahassee, and she had a German professor there, and he told her that the best education she could give her children would be in Germany. So on the boat, she asked us where we'd like to go, and we decided that the place that had snow on the slopes was the place to go, and that was Garmisch. We said, oh, we want to go to Garmisch. And so we did. We were in Germany from 1927 to 33. Of course, at that time, 1933, Hitler was big time. And in school, first thing in the morning was to stand up and salute and say, Heil Hitler. Well, we said Heil Roosevelt because we weren't Hitlerites at that time. We were from USA. I was excited about skiing. We were fascinated by it, and so we picked it up and got to be junior champion in Germany, and we were fascinated with everything about skiing at that time. One of the guys interested in racing in Germany at that time took me over to Mürren in Switzerland to the FIS races and wanted me to race over there, which I did. And that was a big help when I came home. Hitler didn't want Americans in Germany, and so we figured that to hell with him, we'd go home. I was pretty anxious to go to a school where they skied, and we had met this fellow who was from Sunapee, New Hampshire, and he'd heard about Dartmouth and skiing up there, and he says, that's where you want to go to school. There weren't many other skiers. Skiing was just starting. They had the Olympic tryouts in Mount Rainier up in Washington State. So we went up for the tryouts, and got on the team that way. The Olympics in '36 were in Garmisch, which is my so-called hometown at that time. And that pleased me no end because I knew all those trails very well. But I did go over a year early to study the trails, and so I studied them in the summer very precisely so that I would know them in the winter too.
So he knew the mountain, and he knew the trail, and he worked it. He really wanted to have a go at it. And we have to remember, in 1936, he was 22, just coming into his prime.
See, I got 8th and 10th and 11th, I think. Not too hot. I didn't get to wax. I had lousy wax. I pulled and cried all the way.
Now they have technicians who do nothing but wax skis. The racers don't have to know anything about it, but at that time, the racers had to do their own waxing, and he missed the wax. The next week at Sestriere, they had a week of downhills, and he beat all of the guys that were racing in the Olympics. C'est lui. He never speaks of it. Yeah, but I'm sure it's a disappointment.
Dick was truly a hero. He was an international champion, although he never really got a chance to prove it because of the time that he was competing. The Second World War came along, and that killed the Olympics.
In 1940, he would have been at his absolute prime, and it's a shame the games were canceled. He didn't get a second chance at it.
We did go to New Zealand while I was at Dartmouth. That was their winters in our summer, so it was easy to go. I went with the Bradley brothers and Jay Laughlin. He financed my trip over, and the Bradleys financed their own. And we formed an American team. It was really a phony American team, and skied down there. Oh, I found the light meter in Garmisch. That was in the summer when I went over early to train and spot the trails. And I spotted a light meter that had been there all winter. And I figured that was some sign that I should take up photography. And at least that was a good start. And so I bought a Leica, a second-hand Leica to go with it, and started taking pictures at that time because I found a light meter. Steve Bradley and I were fanatics on photography, and so we spent all our time just shooting pictures. And so that's what we did mostly, other than race. So we raced and shot pictures.
In those days, if you had been to Sun Valley, you'd think, well, that was the ultimate. That was the best ski resort and probably the best place to go skiing.
In 1936, Harriman asked my brother and I to go out the first year that Sun Valley opened to race and start skiing there. I was asked by Harriman to work out there as a photographer, which I did while I was still going to school in the summer.
The Harriman Cup was a big race in Sun Valley, and it was started by W. Averill Harriman, who was with the railroad, and it was one of the testing grounds for the athletes for the Olympics, because we didn't have World Cups then. We didn't have Continental Cups. We didn't have any of the other cups now that are used, the Europa Cup, you know, that sort of thing, to test for who was going to race and represent the U.S. in the Olympics.
I won it in 37 and in 38, and then in 40 I won it again. So I kept possession of it because I said, if you win it 3 times, you keep it. I guess that's what kept sticking in my memory, that it was made out of silver and I better win it the 3rd time.
There are a couple of stories about Dad skiing that have grown over the years and in some ways taken on a life of their own.
In the early days of skiing, anything went. I mean, you could do anything you damn well pleased. And we did.
Dad had worked out a shortcut through the trees, but he didn't want anyone else to see it because they didn't have gates then. You know, you just had to follow the trail. Well, nothing said you couldn't shortcut it. And so he saw a place where if he just cut one tree down, he'd cut a couple seconds off, and I'm sure he did it.
Oh, that was just the normal things you do, is you play all the tricks you can. And that was one of them, was to figure out a little shortcut through the trees, but you disguise it with another tree that you just cut out and stick down there, and then have a guy take it out of the way when you go by and stick it back in, so nobody else got the same idea.
He designed and supervised the cutting of Warm Springs Trail for the 4th of his Harriman Cups. Well, at the top up near the top of Warm Springs, there was a very steep pitch called the Stile Hung. And it was not, didn't design it to be run straight, because he believed that people had to just go as fast as they thought they could do. And so it was their judgment. Well, he jumped into it in the race, and the snow was wet because the sun had been on it, and he sank in, and it locked his skis pointing straight down. It was so steep that he was immediately going too fast to turn, and so he just had to run it straight. And he ran it and got down to the bottom where the trail turned left and on down the gully, but he couldn't make the turn. And so he went up and bounced off a tree up on the hillside, somehow stayed on his feet, and said to himself, well, you're a lucky son of a beetle. You might as well run the rest of it straight. And so he did run the rest of it straight. And there's a picture of him after he hit that tree, and he's running the rest of it in his patented kind of semi-stem, where he could just run everything straight and just, control his speed as he had to. But he basically was just ripping it. And got down to the last turn, he couldn't make the turn. In various stories, either he hit a hot dog stand or he hit a ditch or something, but he crashed, got up, walked across the finish line, and still won by a substantial margin. I think that's one of the great runs of all time, and he thinks that's his greatest accomplishment.
She was on the California team that came up to Sun Valley to race in the Jeffers Cup.
Before I'd ever met him, I'd been reading about him. And I kept reading little magazines that they had about skiing, and one of the pictures that fascinated me in the thing was a fellow by the name of Dick Durrance. There was a part of the downhill course called the Stile Hung, which is a very steep slope. And I kept seeing this fella up on a tree, in a tree, and he would be on the opposite slope with his camera that was as big as his head, shooting pictures. And I was sort of fascinated. So finally I stopped and asked him what he was doing, why he wasn't training. And he said, well, I'd rather do this, The next year when he was there, he started making this movie, and he asked me if I wanted to help carry beer up and so on, skiing it a little bit.
In those days, you didn't pay with money, you paid with beer. Steve Bradley was a classmate of mine at Dartmouth, and he and I did films together. And so this is one of the films that we did. We had both worked on angles and so on, what to shoot. So I got Steve to be the cameraman on that. At that time, I asked Averell Harriman if I could, should I shoot some films? I would like to. And he said, sure.
Within easy reach of the valley, these streams still sing the thrills of skiing. For in May, mind you, spring skiing is at a stage of perfection unbelievable to one who has not visited Sun Valley at this time of the year.
The ski chase was a favored subject for ski films at that time because it had a certain amount of story to it.
The game is to catch the man with the red cap. He's the hare. The others are the hounds. The winner is the hound that catches the hare and captures the cap. And he's off in a volley of snowballs. and they're off.
Steve happened to be a guy on snowshoes. That was the difference between our ski chase and other ski chases.
Ah, shucks, says Snowshoe Harry. I ain't got a chance with these tennis rackets on my feet.
But in the film, I was laughing and thought I'd fool everybody because I'd jumped down below the cornice and everybody went skiing off way down the hill below me, except Steve. He was just on his snowshoes and he finally snuck up at the last thing and reached over the cornice and pulled off my hat, and that was, he caught me. That was how the chase ended.
By the end of the film that he was doing, we were quite well acquainted.
Well, as I understand it, Dad took Mom into the darkroom to ask her to marry him.
Dick was in a dark room with a cloth over his eyes because he got snowblind.
She couldn't see who she was getting married to, and so I figured that was the best place to propose.
That's when he proposed to me. Was blindly. And 6 weeks later, we got married.
It is interesting that that he chose the darkroom to propose. I think it says a lot about what became their common bond.
We went to Alta from Sun Valley, went there to race. They had an FIS race there. It was in '41. It was an unusual spot to have fantastic snow within half an hour of the city. That was the right place to have a good resort. Jay Laughlin and I built the first Alta ski lodge. Ski lifts were there. They'd been put up by the Winter Sports Ski Association in Salt Lake City, and started Alta as a resort. Had the ski school, and I had my own ideas about doing that, and the Dipsy Doodle, as he mentioned, was one way to ski, which was to ski the fall line, which meant you never had to set up a turn. You just you went from one ski to the other, and that was what I taught there. The war was breaking out, and before they had the 10th Mountain Division, they had the paratroopers, and I trained them. I got 12 of my buddies, and we trained them at Alta. I'd say a third of them are pretty good. A third of them shouldn't ever be on skis, and a third of them were so-so. And some of them went into the ski troops after that. The Groswell Ski Company in Denver made my ski for me, a Dick Durrant ski. And that was an entirely different type of ski than any that had been made before that.
It was kind of a premium ski, if you will. It was a ski that basically was built the way that Dick wanted the ski built.
It was very flexible, and we just shaved it down so that it would bend, and it bent full length.
I remember they were very flexible, so he could float in the powder, and we always marveled at that.
The particular catalog that was developed was a catalog that my dad used, and it was produced for the ski company in 1941-42 for that season. And it was developed for the purpose of promoting interest in particular skis. That catalog had 4 different individuals in it. Those included Friedel Pfeiffer, Otto Lang, Otto Schneebs, and Dick Durrance. And Dick's context in the ski, as I recall, was basically that it was easy to ski on, fun to ski on, and skied very well in the powder snow. Very popular, very popular. I still have a pair, as a matter of fact. I have the pair that I skied on when I was a senior in high school. The process of the evolution of skis, for instance, from the original skis my dad made to a ski like the Durrance ski, was a change in the camber and a change in the side camber.
The trouble was that if you took all that wood off, your ski would start opening up at the tip. And so I put double camber in at the tip so that when they would press together, they would open up like that. And so that was the double camber that was developed along with a flexible ski.
Dick had a theory, as I recall, that the camber should not be right at the foot plate, which is the center of the ski where your foot went, but it ought to be a little ahead of that.
Double camber right up in the tip that would allow the tip to engage, softer under the foot so that the whole ski could bend more and make a rounder arc, and then a little bit of double camber again in the tail to get the tail to grip and hold all the way through the turn.
So he evolved the concept of a forward camber ski.
You know, they were a beautiful ski, and I always loved the logo he had on the top with an American flag like with little wings, and then his signature. And it was always fun for me to know that those skis were out there with his name on them.
Inspired by the goings-on, one of the local songwriters made up quite a descriptive calypso number.
Say I don't know. When I come to town, all I see is snow. The natives all tell me to learn how to ski, or else I won't be in the society. What happened in Aspen, I want to know. What happened in Aspen, I want to know. What happened in Aspen, I want to know. Baby, what happened?
When Miggs and Dick first settled here, they were kind of one of the top skiers that had ever come to Aspen and settled here. And then he got the job as general manager, I think it was, with the Aspen Skiing Company.
The board of directors knew of Dick, and they asked him to come over to Aspen and run the skiing company.
They brought Dad in primarily because he was the best-known American skier at the time and had a hand already in laying out Warm Springs Trail at Sun Valley, and then had worked in the publicity department there. And then he'd been at Alta, where he ran the ski school and the Alta Lodge, and was certainly one of the founding partners in Summerall in Arapahoe. So he had not only the reputation as a ski racer, but was known to be knowledgeable about building and creating ski mountains.
The trails were very difficult at that time. There was only one way down the mountain, really, which was Roche Run, and it was about this wide, and it had some very steep places in it. So he hired boys, and he designed all the trails, most of the ones that are there now still.
He came in and had a wonderful imagination for ski trail design. I mean, he loved mountains and he understood the flow of mountains. And so he started cutting trails like nobody had ever seen before. I mean, nobody had ever cut a trail as wide as Ruthie's Run at that time. Nothing close to it. And it's still one of the great, great ski runs in the country. Up to that time, you always had to do these little tight turns because the trails were so narrow. And he opened it up and brought the freedom and the rhythm that can be found skiing, and made that possible.
The mindset from New England, where it all started in this country, was that if you left that much expanse open, the wind would come and blow the snow off the trails and you couldn't keep it. He knew that skiing wider was more fun, so he went ahead and he made the trails wider. And by golly, it worked.
I remember specifically that he did a lot of work on the Roche Run, which was, of course, the original racing trail there. And he was also involved in the layout of the courses that were used at the FIS in 1950.
The country's top skiers were beginning to discover Aspen.
Aspen was not too well known at that time, and I was general manager of Aspen. And so my idea was to have the World Championships come to Aspen.
In 1950, Aspen was chosen as the site for the FIS World Ski Championships, the greatest international ski competition that had ever been held in America.
I was convinced from my past experience that it was qualified to hold the World Championships.
Aspen was about to make a name for itself in the world of winter sports. The world's top skiers were waiting to find out what we had to offer.
Dick Durrance went and made a presentation to the FIS that Aspen had the most challenging mountains in the world, it had the finest snow in the world, and that he could provide a course that would literally, I think in his words, knock their socks off.
He knew enough of the racers and he knew enough of the people in the FIS to make the pitch, and he got it.
Racers of 14 nations arrive at the little town for the first ski championship ever held in America, the FIS meet of 1950. FIS standing for the International Ski Federation.
I was a freshman at Western State at the time, and the whole ski team went over to get a chance to see the championships, and we were there, and Dick asked us to go with him to do one final slip down, one final preparation pass down the downhill. And there was a section at the bottom of what's called Spar Gulch that was a road that goes out and then a very precipitous drop-off called Niagara. And the French at the time were famous for not skiing in what's called a stem or a snowplow. They never put their feet apart. And as we skied down it and skied out to the Niagara, fortunately we slowed down and stopped before we had to go off of it. I can remember Dick sort of cackling with his kind of funny laugh, saying, "Well, watch those damn Frenchmen here. I'll bet they snowplow now." And he was creative. He was an innovative guy.
6 days before the races started, it rained all the way up to Midway, which I'd never seen, and no one had ever seen it do that before. Then it turned to snow.
We had about 2.5 feet of new snow, which really saved the event. And the next day there was no training, of course, so everybody went up to ski the powder, and Dick came up, and he put on a show that all these people, all these foreign skiers couldn't keep up with him. They'd start down the mountain with him, finally they'd just stop and sit down and start laughing, because he was just like a jackrabbit going through the trees, bouncing from one ski to the next.
It was the most perfect conditions imaginable for the 6 days of the races.
Yes, there were more than 100 men and women representing Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Yugoslavia, Italy, Holland, Great Britain, France, Finland, Canada, Austria, Chile, Argentina, and the United States.
And rather than put up the teams in the hotels, there were families who were from Yugoslavia, and they would put up the Yugoslavian teams, and families who were there from Germany, and they would put up the German teams, and so on.
What Dick introduced was, phenomenal steepness. He chose the steepest way down Aspen Mountain, but it also required twists and turns through the trees, and then the old remnants of the mining days, these incredible dams in Spar Gulch that they had to take out since, that you would just get incredible air off of. And so it made for some spectacular race coverage. The trail doesn't just go straight down the mountain, it actually has to go winding around and over things. And there are a lot of old dams from the mining days. They had to jump the dams. So Dick created a course that was more of an obstacle course than I think people would have seen elsewhere. And it made for a spectacular, hair-raising race.
He said he wanted to test them. He put great store in the racers' judgment. He didn't like to put gates up there to tell them where to go. He wanted them to start, and he wanted them to basically make their own judgments on how fast they thought they could run the course. And he set up a course that nobody could run straight.
The camera in slow motion picks up Stein Eriksen pointing for Niagara. A tremendous leap here. He's traveling at a terrific clip. He's gambling on his speed now.
For instance, at Niagara, Stein Eriksen took it too straight, too fast, and couldn't hold the transition. He flew way down the thing and couldn't hold the transition. And just the compression, the G-forces just laid him down.
Zeno Colo ready to hit the hill.
Zeno Colo used his judgment and won it.
There he goes, and we'll follow him down the entire course. Zeno Colo approaching the dam. Coming over, lopsided, but cat-like, he's still in his feet. Colo going into Spar Gulch. Colo jumps over the notch of Niagara Falls and sweeps down across the bumps. Into Schuss-Gully. And at last, Zeno Colo points for the finish line.
We were now not a regional but an internationally famous ski area. And from then on, the world has come to Aspen to ski.
It was great fun, and it was a wonderful place to bring up children.
Aspen was a pretty nifty place to grow up. It was just such an open, small town with all the cultural advantages. We had the music, and we had people doing interesting discussions, and we had artists, and we had films, and we had all that. But it was still less than 2,000 people.
It was a very social little town. Everybody knew everybody.
There were 11 of us in my first grade class. Well, interestingly, when I came back around my 50th birthday, 6 of the 11 were there, still in Aspen, and we gathered up our 50th year.
The school children would get out on Friday afternoon, and they would ask for some of us older people if we would take them and teach them the basics of skiing. Dick had come up and help us because he had 2 kids that wanted to ski race, Dick and Davy.
Everybody goes to school. They start them in young here. They learn to ski about when they can walk. Cute, huh? He looks like he's mad about something. Or maybe he's just determined. They stick to it, and it's surprising how quickly they catch on. The first thing you have to learn when you're sliding on these hickory sticks is to maintain an upright position. Ooh, ouch! Whoops! See what I mean? Here's where the obstacle comes in. The youngsters have to climb under and over a series of benches. Now, this little fella's really mixed up. And here's the winner. A proud kid, I'll bet.
Dick was busy running the whole resort, and there was a speed graphic sitting around with nobody playing with it, so I would pick it up and I'd go around and shoot pictures of what was going on in the streets and of the buildings and of the people who were there. This is in 1948, 49.
Mom was learning more about taking pictures from Dad and starting to go out on her own and just document the renaissance of the town, the rebirth of what had been a pretty interesting town, had gone to sleep, and was making the metamorphosis from a mining town to a resort.
Dickie was in the first grade and Dave was in preschool, so I had plenty of time to do it, and I would just put that thing on my horse and go around town and shoot pictures, and those are the pictures that are still selling now.
She was engaged in documenting all this and the people who were doing it. She began to develop her own signature as a photographer, her own photographic style.
Meigs Durance's photographs of early Aspen are just absolute treasures. They bring out more than just the portraits of the people. The whole setting gives you that ambiance that was post-World War II Aspen. We're here to enjoy the outdoors. We're here to celebrate life is good.
Her photographs of old Aspen, life on the street, the ski scene, the kids playing, the snow on the fence, bring back an era in Aspen's past that people wouldn't know about.
It's a marvelous set of pictures that have great appeal for people who've come since then.
Her pictures, her images are very much associated with early Aspen because about half of the photographs are hers. Franz Berko, who was here at the same time, also a very, very good photographer. His are the other half of the images.
She did stories for the big magazines of these adventures they had, and she was as good as anyone. You know, as good an adventure photographer as lived in that time.
Well, one of my very most favorites was Bingo riding the chairlift. Because he lived on top of the mountain with a family, and the oldest child in the family was Anna Marie, and she would ski down to school in the winter. And Bingo would follow her all the way down, and then he'd sit outside the door and wait for her to come out. And then they'd walk over to the lift, and the man on the lift, the attendant would put him on a chair and put the blanket around him, and then they'd lift Anna Marie on. They'd take the ride up to 45 minutes to the top where she lived.
Her photographic skill and her sense of composition was remarkable, and people here just love looking at the old pictures. Her photographs of old Aspen are kind of a window into our history that we're so lucky to have that.
Just outside of town, there's a wilderness area called Snowmass. 10,000 acres of untouched powder. This will be Aspen tomorrow, by 1968. But that's another story. A whole new album.
Newsreels are kind of the start of this documentary thing. A cameraman would go out and shoot a few clips, edit in the camera practically. They would show the clip, and then a newsreader would read some narration. In the early days of photojournalism, that's what they did.
Most of the ski films that started out were lecture films. Guys would go around with their films and show them.
So they were documenting their lifestyles like a slideshow with moving pictures. So a lecture film really is, it's like a moving slideshow with a narration in person by the filmmaker giving the lecture. And the first one that we can think of here that was famous in the ski world was John Jay, who was a post-war ski filmmaker who did wonderful work. And what Dick ended up doing is evolving that and I think they looked at the feature films being made in Europe and in Hollywood, and they saw what good editing could do to a film. The things that were nice about his films is that they were complete productions. He would have good narration, great soundtracks, and the editing would be such that you wouldn't need somebody doing the lecture-style soundtrack on it. And it was just more sophisticated and much more fun to watch, really.
I was doing a little instructing on my own, giving Rocky, my wife, some tips on the fine art of skiing. Just a few elementary points. I wanted to make it simple at first. Well, she did pretty good. Could be she had a few lessons before someplace. Oh, well.
The film Ski Champs has been with me all my life. I've loved that film from the beginning. It's some of the most exciting ski action that I think that's ever been gotten on film.
Marius Eriksson of Norway, down Niagara. And he's had it. Topside, Lacroix takes off. Followed by Albino Alvarado of Italy.
The guy's coming off the big jump.
Freddie Ruby of Switzerland pours down Niagara.
All the guys bouncing down Chuscali. I mean, it's just fabulous ski action.
Ruby looking good in Chuscali.
It's a race like we've never seen before and probably never seen since.
Canadian racer falls here. Replace your divots. Yes, out of the field of 58 racing this downhill at Aspen, 10 were disqualified or not able to finish. But the men who have run the difficult, exhausting downhill today will not soon forget Niagara, Spar, Bell Mountain, and the Dam.
The FIS races put Aspen on the map for skiing internationally. This film had an awful lot to do with that. When people saw this, they had to get into skiing and they had to come to Aspen because this is obviously what was happening, where it was at. These guys were having the most fun, and the movies really show that.
Aspen album, that was the first promotional film for skiing here.
Dad would do a documentary film. They would be films where the film tells a story. It's about the place, and he uses the craft of filmmaking.
This is Aspen Mountain in the Colorado Rockies, a place that sets the standards for American skiing today. Over the years, we've watched it grow from a near ghost town into the country's top winter resort. And along the way, like most people, we seem to have taken a few pictures of ourselves and our town. You're looking at some of them now.
The delightful part about Dick's films is they are not just skiing. They allow us the opportunity to look at the community, people riding a horse-drawn sleigh through the streets, and dogs running up and down the streets, and kids playing in the streets. So it's a very good documentary type film to use to study the history of the community.
The ski jumping shots that I loved were those great shots of the junior racers and the kids in Aspen, the Aspen album, I think, where they're catching good air off this 40-meter jump, and he has them flying directly up and over the camera. And it always takes a little courage to get right down there beneath them, because you wonder if some guy hooks the tip, and you know he's gonna come right in on top of you.
He worked with very good editors, Jean Oser in particular, and good writers, Bob Hirschberg. And they would do well-crafted films with a storyline, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Close-ups, medium shots, wide establishing shots, montage sequences.
Buckle up. 10 seconds to go. Take it easy. Go.
Great music tracks that would go along with them. You know, they were complete films.
Throughout much of the world, mountain ranges, their slopes and valleys whitened by the eternal round of storms, are hurtling their challenge to a hardy breed of men and women. Sparkling in the sunlight under the clearest of skies, frosted bushes and trees are signposts to a fresh season of sport. Ahead are vast vistas of unbroken snow awaiting the bite of speeding skis. Dick Durrance, the skiing cameraman, goes along on the frozen trail to obtain unusual flying shots of the quick trip down. But these skiers are not along just for the fun of sliding down mountains. They are here for a most serious purpose, and this is practice at a dazzling pace. This winter, the finest skiers on Earth are to be found all over Western Europe, sharpening their skills in furious descents through the powdered snow. For this is a winter of winters. This is an Olympic winter.
Dick was a photographer and skier first before he became a filmmaker. And I am very impressed looking back at the photography he did in the early days and how that carried into his cinematography in his films. He had a sense of composition that was very advanced, a sense of light.
Even the sun seems to be enjoying the fun as it cuts across our picture, spilling a rainbow of colors into the camera's lens.
The backlit drops coming off the melting ice, or the way the snow flies in the slow motion powder skiing shots. Backlit, beautiful stuff. You only know how hard it was to pull stuff like that off with those big, clunky, heavy cameras when you go out and try it. And you'll be so frustrated if you do try it because it was very, very difficult.
When he skied down the FIS downhill with a camera between his legs, I thought, whoa, Dad, that's pretty amazing. And I still think it is.
From the dam here, we turn down into Spar Gulch.
He was skiing on something slightly better than a bear trap bindings, leather straps wrapped around your ankles.
These swings give the racers plenty of headaches. On to the Bell Mountain Traverse.
Your feet are wobbling. It's like wearing really loose tennis shoes.
Picking up speed through the draw.
To be able to ski on wobbly skis, really long skis, and hold this camera smoothly in front of you and get the shot is remarkable.
Along the cat road with maximum speed.
It's a testament to his ability as an athlete as well as an artist.
Aiming straight at the notch of Niagara Falls now, watching the ice track under your skis. The big jump ahead. Oh, you don't think you care to shoot Niagara just yet? Okay, we'll pull off and let George do it.
The only people who can really make films like this are people who come to it from being an athlete. One, you know your subject. He's a skier already. Secondly, he was a world-class, Olympic-class athlete in his own right. And you need that just to be able to come in and get what he was getting.
And throughout Norway, lights glow and flags fly, for the 6th Winter Olympics are underway.
At the Olympics, he was probably on the sidelines with a telephoto lens. And the stuff that I've seen that's most remarkable is the slow motion, follow focus, tracking shot, where you're tracking somebody flying through the air. They're probably going 70 or 80 miles an hour.
The rush down the slippery slope and the sudden feeling of sailing in space as you glide majestically down to the valley below.
To stay on them and stay locked and focused, telephoto, it's such a beautiful, beautiful shot, and it's so hard to get.
The meet's longest leap is this one by Norway's Arnfinn Bergman, 223 feet. Bergman glides to an Olympic championship. 68 meters, that's skiing. And that's the end of the jumping event. The only competition remaining is the fight to get back to Oslo.
I can remember watching a great Lowell Thomas documentary in the Gobi Desert of China. And lo and behold, Dick Durrance was the cinematographer for that. So he not only did ski films, but he did some incredible documentary films.
Lowell Thomas was a fanatic skier, and an old friend. We had known him for a long time. And he loved to go skiing. That's what he would do on his vacations.
And he gave his radio broadcasts from Aspen occasionally.
And at that time, he was about to go to Nepal as a U.S. representative or sort of ambassador for the wedding of the Crown Prince and Princess.
In this strange and exotic land, we're going to see things that few Westerners have ever seen. We'll attend a royal wedding in Kathmandu, a ceremony of oriental splendor, here in the last Hindu kingdom on the face of the earth.
He asked us if we wouldn't like to go, to come and shoot the wedding, that he could get us into places that not many people could get into.
It may have been the first promotional effort by the country of Nepal.
Guests from all over the world crowd around as the ceremony begins. The Crown Prince expresses his love and devotion to the princess by symbolically washing her feet.
They wisely chose Dick because he was probably one of the few people at the time who was able to travel very lightly, like you'd need to on a trek, with the camera gear necessary, to pull off something like that at a high level of quality. Who else do you take? Somebody who can handle the outdoors, the cold temperatures.
Hardly a foot of our trail is level. Every hour, the air gets thinner, breathing more difficult. We're up among the high peaks. That's Ama Dablam, known as the Jewel Box.
And Nepal was really the opposite ends of the earth back then.
The ancient Hindu wedding ceremony is over. Perhaps the last time that the world will see it performed with such pageantry and splendor.
I think they introduced a lot of Americans to this kingdom on the other side of the world in the Himalaya. The footage he brought back, it all just looked like such a fantastic place. And I think that film probably inspired a lot of people to go to the mountains and to visit Nepal and the Himalaya.
Meanwhile, in the songs they sing as they work, they remember their homeland in the high mountain country, on the roof of the world. A world not too different from the one that we are about to visit as we trek up into the Himalayan regions of Nepal.
Dick Durrance was a ski photographer, but he had a passion for skiing that was literally unparalleled. I think that passion is a passion that got passed from father to son. My love of skiing wasn't because I happened to get started skiing. My love of skiing was because I had a father who absolutely loved skiing, and he taught my brother and I to love it as well. I'm sure that Dick and Davy were instilled in the passion for skiing by both their father and their mother.
In the end, I'm the one who followed the skiing path more. I started ski racing here when I was 5 years old and raced until I was about 26, 27. That was the main emphasis in my life.
I was raised with images. I knew about images. I just instinctively knew about images. And then I got hooked on playing golf. I loved to play golf. So I was playing a lot of golf and realized, you're spending so much time on the golf course, you're either going to have to give up some of the golf or make some of your living out here. And I looked at it and said, no, wait a minute, these are landscapes. I like to shoot landscapes. I could do this. And so I went out and shot a few golf courses and have since migrated into the little niche market of photographing golf courses, which is what I do today. One of us is following in their footsteps as a photographer, and the other is following in their footsteps as skier.
Heritage of the family has been important to me, and it was always part of my plan to honor them within the store. The shop has been a dream for 30 years and a work in progress for 8 years. I went through a number of the old pictures and saw one that I thought was really dynamic and fun, and worked with a designer here in Aspen to take one of Mom's first pictures that she took of Dad in Alta and stylize that and abstract it enough that it still had that spirit, and yet it was released from just being a copy of a photographic image. We've got some of their old trophies to make that connection that their spirit is still alive in this store.
I had the chance to work with Dick in the mid-'80s on a promotional film for the Aspen Skiing Company. And we spent a winter going out on early, beautiful mornings, filming the fresh snow in the trees and skiers skiing powder. And remember one day we're up on Aspen Mountain underneath the chairlift, and people would yell down to Dick, "Who are you? Are you Warren Miller?" And he'd say, "No, I'm Warren Barrymore," I think is what he would use, to naming himself after Warren Miller and Dick Barrymore, the other filmmakers. And he just used to laugh about that. Because, somebody who's so famous and has done so much, a lot of people don't know who he is. So it's nice to see that people can remember him through his great films and the great photography of his and Miggs.
The skiers in the 40s and 50s, and specifically today's skiers, may have more in common than people would give credit for. Right now, I think skiing has become free again. You're free to come up with your own set of rules. You're free to interpret the sport your own way. And I think back in the 40s and 50s, because they were, pioneering the whole thing, that was very true. I follow Dick's lead on being a natural skier and just letting my technique evolve accordingly and not necessarily be stimulated by what I'm supposed to be doing or what is supposedly working the best in this situation. Just allow your skiing to evolve within itself. And like I say, to steal Dick's own words, like some people like natural foods, I like natural skiing.
The way he put so much enthusiasm, so much energy into skiing and so much fun. It was always a big laugh and a big smile and, you know, go for broke and have a good time.
He didn't quite get the credit that he deserved simply because the politics and the war interfered with his accomplishments, but I think he's probably one of the finest skiers that the United States has ever produced, but I always remember him as he's just a really nice guy.
The Dipsy Doodle's a thing to be with. The Dipsy Doodle will get in your head. And if it gets you, it couldn't be worse. The things you say will come out in reverse. Like you love I and me love you. That's the way the Dipsy Doodle works.
Dad was a champion. Dad was a world-class athlete. And there's a special gift there, and it's a marvel to see.